This is the Bush Whisperer coming at you from the beautiful penguin sanctuary. You can see one of our little late nesters laying some eggs, sitting on her nests. Funny that the weather is so far behind the usual schedule. I'm obviously at Boulders Penguin Sanctuary, southern tip of Africa, Cape Town, Cape Agulhas. Hello. And I've come to talk to you today about myth. Just exactly what myth is, and how important is myth. Understanding myth is quite fundamental to understanding culture. It's also fundamental to understanding our conditioning, our thinking process. But we do not realize how much of our lives are dictated by the myths that we believe, the myths that we've been taught. Think of your childhood, the myths that you were taught about Cry Wolf, the other stories, Jack and the Beanstalk. All of these little kiddie stories and rhymes have all become a big part of our lives. And they've structured the way in which we perceive ourselves, reality, and each other. The way in which we perceive our society, our culture, and essentially what we can consider cultural indoctrination is really the mythical teachings that have been handed down to us from the previous generations. Shamanic philosophy is essentially the embodiment of myth. For the shaman observes nature and sees the mythologies of humanity and consciousness expressed through nature, and is understanding that all of creation is a myth. The entirety of the universe is one big myth that we believe. And this myth is essentially the dream of Dreamtime. And that this profound mythological reality is living within us, through us, and that the guides are the living embodiment of this mythos. It's fundamental to all shamanism, fundamental to understanding the nature of the universe. If you want to get right down to it, consider what you know as reality. I can feel the ground beneath my feet. I can hear the waves in the distance, which to my mind is water, a wave moving across an ocean, breaking, bound in space and time by the laws of matter, physicality, gravity, resting upon the ocean floor. This is the myth that I believe. This is the myth that my beliefs have structured into the dream time that I experience as reality. When we want to consider reality from a more occult perspective, we need to realize that 99% of all reality is essentially a vacuum. Now that is another myth. But these myths hold the relativity of truth. And they all express certain relativities that point towards greater truths. The truths that the shaman understands intuitively, that reality is fundamentally a dream. And so this ground beneath my feet isn't really ground. It's really a magnetic field. It's really electromagnetic frequencies that are a different electromagnetic frequency to the electromagnetic frequencies of my body. And that what I'm seeing and hearing are different frequencies of electromagnetism. And that we are consciousness expressing electromagnetic force, magnetism and electricity. And the barrier between electric and magnetic, we call this matter, which is a continuum of being. And it is the essential reality that we exist in, through which movement can become what it appears to be in the sphere of reality. So actually, the ground is a myth. The sky is a myth. Everything that you can see and touch, essentially, is part of the mythos. Every human being that you've met, every character on the stage of life, essentially a myth. We create ourselves out of the myth of our history. And the history is what we seem to be doing, what we seem to be experiencing. And so this myth of history becomes the myth of the future. And we move towards the myth of the future from the myth of history through the myth of the present. And so there are these three fundamental myths that were deeply understood by the shaman as the three aspects, the three dream worlds, the three worlds, if you will, the three aspects of dream time. a more accurate way of considering it. And this myth has become the fundamental myth behind all religious mythologies. The Trinity, Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, Tao, Yang and Yin. Whichever culture you look at, you've got the same three aspects reflected. And they reflect the fundamentals of the mythologies of being back towards us. That the nature of this creation is essentially electrical, magnetic, and the interplay of electromagnetism between these two extremities. And that this is the fundamental structure of reality. Yet, is that what you're experiencing, or are you experiencing the myth of reality? The same can be said for the self. The self is a myth too. Now, understand the relativities of these mythologies are true. This is something else to consider. The specifics of the mythology might be untrue, but the relativities are true. When we consider the mythologies from our past, which we can consider as the bones of history, we see these characters upon which mythologies have been structured and bound. I want you to consider a tree for a moment. Realize the way in which a tree exposes much that you can see and experience as a tree, but that the other half of the tree is hidden beneath the soil. Think of the soil as the annals of time, the way history has covered up the truth of what was to reveal what is above the ground. And in this way, what we can see as the footprints of history are essentially above the ground, proverbially speaking, in terms of this myth that I've created for you using the tree as an object, a mythological consideration, a mandala, if you will, from which to create a perspective of truth, understanding the nature of mythology. So there are beings from the past that do embody these myths, and these beings that embody these myths come cyclically, back and forth, moving through the annals of time, to re-embody and to reinvigorate the flesh of the myth, so that the myth can find a warm, nurturing place to live within our hearts. For the myth is fundamental to the nature of the self. For the self tends to view all things through the mythology or the mythology of the heart. And this is a fundamental thing to understand when we consider the way in which the mind works. We anthropomorphize absolutely everything around us. We anthropomorphize with animate and inanimate. Animals, trees, all things become anthropomorphized. If you've ever experienced looking at someone's shoes very closely, you will even notice that the subconscious anthropomorphizes people's shoes and gives them a sense of character. And that you can actually read people's shoes. You can gain an insight into the nature of their personalities by observing their shoes. There's a mythos in everything. And the mythos is what the shaman reads when he's reading the omen. For the omen are the ways in which the mythologies are reflected in the physical plane, giving us an insight into the natures of the hidden roots of the tree of life, which are operating behind closed doors of the mind, backstage, if you would, and presenting the stage of life so that we can experience what we think we see, know, and understand as the mythology of reality. I want you to think about this for a moment. Consider how important mythology is. It will give you an insight into why it's so fundamental to study the mythologies of the ancients in order to gain an understanding of the current sociological model. The current model of the culture that we're living in is based upon those ancient mythologies. We can also gain an insight into the nature of our very hearts and ourselves by understanding that the same mythological pattern, blueprint, program, story that has been played out by all of the mythological characters in the past are being played out right here within us right now. And that this anthropomorphic reality is truly the substance of myth. And when we start to appreciate this, we start to realize how all human beings are fundamentally the same. And that we are all one big creature experiencing a multitude of experiences simultaneously through the unity of life. Smash the like button, share this video, get it out there, let the algorithms work for us. And also recognize that the resistance that we experience within ourselves to understanding ourselves and the nature of reality is essentially the inability to grasp the myth of life. And so mythology becomes a wonderful doorway that we can walk through towards grasping the truth and becoming the embodiment of the truth, and understanding that the truth is moving through us and is an expression of that which is within us. But the entirety of the universe is a myth that flows from deep within us upon this river of life, bound through the field of consciousness, becoming what seems to be this myth of reality. So I hope this has been a useful and helpful few tips, part of this wonderful teaching course that I'm sharing here for free. It's growing fast. Don't miss it. It's best to follow it from the beginning, step by step, follow all of the videos. Also, subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the updates. The sequentiality in the way that these videos are shared through this podcast medium will also be quite useful if you follow the sequence. Sort of like a training manual for martial arts. It's best to do the right lesson at the right time for one's personal development. So enjoy yourself, have an absolutely gorgeous day, go out and experience the myth of life, realize that it's a myth, recognize the mythology, embrace the truth that the mythology shares, and start to transcend the nature of the myth of life and become the true living embodiment of the myth of true consciousness. This is the Bush Whisperer sharing a few words about the myth of life. Take it easy, enjoy yourself, and be well. Om Shanti.